We are talking about judo with Oon Yeoh. He's written an article on the KL.com blog. Check it out, KLJudo.
KLJudo.com.
Thank you.
KLJudo.com.
Let me repeat that. KLJudo.com. Check it out. In this interview, pardon me, we're going to be discussing an article he's written called "How Do You Develop a Throw?" Hello, Oon. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me here.
Well, thank you for joining us again. I have a series of questions in regards to your article. As I mentioned right from the top, people should check it out on kljudo.com. My first question for you is, actually, before we dive into it, what inspired you to write this particular blog on how to develop a throw?
Okay, that's actually an interesting question. What happened was a white belt player from Singapore wrote to me, messaged me, and said that she was going to be visiting Malaysia in a couple of months' time, and was interested in dropping by my dojo and learning some judo. She had some friends who had trained in KL Judo before. Some friends from Singapore who had trained in KL Judo, and so she had heard good things about the club, and she wanted to visit and learn some judo, and she's a white belt despite having trained for about a year, because she didn't train that frequently. It was like on and off, and having some trouble developing a throw. And while I was chatting with her to know a little bit more about her judo and what she needs when she comes for the visit, she said something to the effect like, "I wish I could develop a throw," or "I wish I could, I could throw someone." So obviously she's learned techniques, but in a randori context, she's having difficulty getting a throw, and that's a common thing, right? I mean, a lot of beginners learn techniques and they learn the techniques quite well, but they can't get it to work in a sparring situation, in a randori situation. So that comment by her sparked an idea in me to, why don't I do a deep dive into what it actually takes to develop a throw.
Fascinating. And you've written this blog here, almost 2,000 words. I've read it, and I have some questions. The first one I want to ask is in regards to instructor and classical versus modern techniques. Two-part question for you, sir. How do you suggest students approach learning if they are taught by an instructor who focuses on classical version of throws? And a follow-up to that would be, what is the best way for them to adapt to modern competitive techniques?
Okay, so I guess it also depends on the student, because, for example, I know one, I have a judo acquaintance from Hong Kong who trains in a dojo there, which is a very classical dojo. The judo there is based on Kodokan judo, and the instructor was from the Kodokan, and he teaches very classical judo, not modern IJF. It's classical, and it's what he likes. It's what the student likes. The student likes that. He wants that. So I think if that's what the student wants, right, and the student is into classical judo, I want to learn classical judo, then that's fine. You don't need to learn modern judo. I mean, if that's what you want. Similarly, there are students out there who only want to do kata. They want to specialize in kata. You know what's kata, right?
Right.
Form, right? It's not randori. It's not free practice. Oh, sorry. I need to. Sorry. I guess you can edit out this part. I don't seem to be able to turn off my WhatsApp. So let me turn off the sound here.
No worries.
That's a good thing that it's not live.
Absolutely.
At least you can edit. Okay, sorry. So I was saying, so you're familiar with kata, yeah, right? So some students, they just want to do kata, right? So if they want to do kata and they're not interested in randori, they're not interested in shiai competition, they don't need to learn modern techniques, right? So I'm not I'm not a evangelist of competition techniques. I say if you want to do kata, that's fine. Go ahead and do your kata. If you want to learn classical techniques only, go ahead. But in my club, we focus on competition style modern judo. That's what we do in my club. So that's what we push, modern judo. And that article that you're referring to uh, uh, is written from that perspective. So if a student wants to learn modern judo, then there are ways to go about doing that. But I think it's important to point out that it's not necessarily something that I push for everybody. If you tell me you're interested in classical judo, you're not interested in modern judo, I say power to you. Go ahead and pursue your class. I'm not gonna evangelize and say, oh, you should adopt modern classical, modern competitive judo. If that's not what you're interested in, please pursue what you're interested in. Okay, but if somebody is interested in modern competition judo, it is a problem if they're in a dojo that is very classical. I have friends and acquaintances who are stuck in that kind of situation where the dojo that they are in is very classical, very traditional, and what they're desperate to learn IJF techniques, and they watch IJF videos and wish they could learn these modern techniques, but it's not taught or not even really, in some cases, frowned upon in that dojo. And I myself have been in dojos earlier in my career. I have been in dojos where, if you did a modern technique like a drop kataguruma, side takedown, they will frown upon it. They say that's not real, judo. That's a bastardization of what is classical judo. So I know where they're coming from. It's actually a bit of a problem if you're in a dojo where the emphasis is classical. And what I would say, first of all, is that if there is a dojo in your area that emphasizes more on competition, and that's what you're interested in, then probably you have to switch dojos. But what if, I guess the natural question is, what if there are no competitive dojos around, and your dojo is classical, the next dojo is also classical, the next dojo everywhere around you is classical, and that some people are caught in that type of situation, right? Then in such a situation, I guess the best you can do is you can learn from online resources. Nowadays, there are a lot of videos. Jimmy Pedro and Travis Stevens have a website called American Judo System, where they teach modern competitive judo. Fighting Films has a website, Superstar Judo, where they teach modern competitive judo. And there are others, online, where you can buy videos. You can buy, high quality instructional videos, sometimes from world and Olympic champions, and learn modern competitive judo. It's not the same thing as having a coach who can teach you that, a live coach who can teach you and guide you and give you feedback. It's not the same thing, but it's still better than nothing. And learning from video. And I guess that's what you have to turn to if you can't get it in your dojo, right?
Right.
Hopefully, even if they don't teach it, at least they tolerate it. That means in randori, if you were to do a modern competitive technique, they won't frown upon it and say that that's wrong. Hopefully they'll tolerate, as long as it works, it's clean, it's legal. Okay, we'll tolerate. We don't teach it, but if you're able to pull off that unusual technique and it's clean and legal and doesn't injure people, maybe they'll allow it. A real problem would arise if you do a nice clean technique, it's legal, it doesn't hurt anybody, and they still frown upon it and say that, well, that doesn't look classical, that's not real judo. Then that's really a problem. If you're the type of person who is into competition judo and you're in that kind of dojo, you probably need to move to another dojo.
Speaking of, you mentioned randori. I wanted to know, in terms of understanding resistance in randori, how can a judo practitioner systematically prepare for that active resistance encountered in randori Can you elaborate on any specific drills or exercises that can simulate this resistance during practice?
Actually, the best way uh to to get used to randori is to just dive into it and do randori, do lots of randori, you know, and learn through trial and error. You know, you can't. I mean, you could do some drills, I guess, but why do drills to prepare for randori when you can just do randori? You know, you
Right.
do. I mean, drills are important. Drills are important, and we can talk about that later on if you want about the importance of drills to throwing. But drills are not uh, necessarily the best way to prepare for randori. The best way to prepare for randori is to do randori. Just dive in and go in there and jump in. You know, jump into the deep end of the pool and just find your way around. You know, I really think so. I really believe that. You know, that's how I learned as well. You go in there, and at first you're going to get thrown, you're going to get countered, nothing's going to work. But the more you do it, the more you get used to the feel of randori, get used to the defenses of your opponent. You learn to overcome those defenses. You learn to evade counters and stuff like that. And you learn by doing. So to answer your question, the best way is to just dive in and just do it and do lots of it.
Excellent. The next question I have, you mentioned like video resources, right? You've mentioned the usage of, you know, if you're in a situation where there are no modern judo dojos around, you're probably going to have to lean on the internet, social media, etc., to get your information. You mentioned fighting films in the article. How should a beginner judoka evaluate and choose the right videos? And how do they ensure they are learning techniques that align with modern judo? And I ask this, I know you just mentioned there's a lot of content out there, and there sure is, especially on YouTube, but sometimes I guess there are varying degrees of quality instruction videos, if I can say, and I'm not knocking any of these videos. I'm not a judo expert, I'm a judo fan, but I've looked at some videos, instructional videos online, and I find that there's a dichotomy in terms of how much instruction is provided, how many different scenarios are looked at, and the detail of the instruction in the video. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to just watching
Yes.
someone get dropped on their back for ippon. So
Yes, that's a really good question, a really relevant question, which is, you know, what kind of videos can you trust, right? Basically, I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there, free stuff as well as paid stuff. And if you watch the wrong thing, then you learn the wrong thing, right? So how, I think your question is that how do you know? You know, if you're not an expert and you're just learning, how do you know that I can trust this source or I'm learning the right thing? The reason I mentioned fighting films in my article is that they are a trusted resource. You know, in general, you can't go wrong with fighting films. They're really good. They're professionals. They know what they're doing. The production quality is good. The technical quality is good. And
the voiceovers are great too.
Neil Adams. but I think the good thing about fighting films is this. I mentioned in my article that, you know, the Japanese champions, they have a tendency to show the classical Kodokan version of techniques. You know, so if you get a great champion, you know, you name it, you know, whoever, Inoue, Koga, whoever, you get any of those great champions, and they go on these clinics and they demonstrate techniques, and they tend to show the classical way. A lot of the times they tend not to show the actual way that they did it in competition. This is quite commonplace. It's quite well known. I remember talking to Shintaro Higashi. Do you know him?
Yeah.
Or you know him? Yeah,
I've heard
the
of
New
him,
York,
yeah.
the New York coach, quite famous. And he's Japanese American, right? And I asked him. I said, why is that? Why do the Japanese, you know, you see their videos or you go to their clinics and you see this great champion and you want to learn their technique and they're showing the classical technique. And he said, I don't know, but that's what they do. You know, maybe they just feel an obligation to show the classical way. Maybe it's just the ethos of the Japanese. They should show the proper classical official version, rather than their version, which is unorthodox. Maybe they feel they should not be showing unorthodox techniques, right? But what Fighting Films has done, and they've done videos with Japanese, with several Japanese champions, right? Is that they've managed to persuade them or coax them or appeal to them to actually show how it is actually done, and so if you watch, for example, the instructional video with Koga, so you get to see how Koga actually does, or how Koga actually did all his unusual techniques. So Fighting Films has been able to get the champions featured to actually show the way it was done in competition, rather than just the classical version. So Fighting Films is renowned for that. They're good at that, and so very, very reliable. So if you go with them, can't go wrong.
May I ask, sorry, real quick, even for pure beginners, let's say you're crossing over from another grappling sport, and you have no understanding of judo, or even if, let's say, you're just a pure beginner in martial arts as a whole, you're 16 and you want to learn, like, do you think that high level quality content is also applicable to them?
Good question. Really good question. I think it's a little bit above their, they'll go over their heads. I think it's sort of like, because it's very high level advanced stuff. So if you're an absolute beginner, or you're not at all familiar with judo, let's say you do some other martial arts and you want to learn judo, most of the titles in Fighting Films are really advanced level, high level competition stuff by Olympic champions or world champions. So actually not that suitable. But having said that, there are a few titles that they have that cater specifically to beginners. So there is content in there that's suitable for beginners, but not all. And actually the bulk of the content is quite advanced stuff. It's meant for, really, when I look at it, I think it's meant for black belts. It's meant for black belts to get even, or brown belts to get even. It's really not sort of meant for yellow belts, who don't even really know, or white belts who don't really even know techniques yet, So that's what I would say. Another really good source is Jimmy Pedro and Travis Stevens' website called American Judo System. You can look it up on Google, and they've got basic stuff. They've also got advanced stuff. So and those two are very credible, and the quality of the videos is very good. So I can recommend that as well. And they have actually quite a lot more of basic judo compared. They've got a lot of advanced stuff as well, but they I think deliberately try to cater to some beginners as well. So if you're a beginner, or you're from some other martial arts or grappling sport, and you want to learn judo, fundamentals of judo, it's a pretty good place to start, this American Judo System.
Very interesting. I just want to quickly mention, I remember, I'm familiar with Fighting Films, of course, and I remember they did one with they did maybe more than one with the Georgians, but I remember there was one with Trekashvili, I believe it was, demonstrating just various Uranagi setups and all that. And I remember, like, in terms of the camera angle and the way they captured it, it is
fantastic.
It is incredible. Even if you have no interest in judo or combat sports as a whole, even from a cinematography, if I can,
you just want to watch it, right?
It's incredible, man. It is stunning stuff. Like I'm embarrassed to say this, but I remember watching those clips, because I love throws, especially lifts, man. There's just something incredible, and the landing and everything from both a visual, storytelling perspective, blah blah. But it's just stunning visuals, man. And and if I can ask just a quick follow up. Obviously, I'm interviewing you from Canada. we speak English here, we speak French, and I know that judo's a global sport. Obviously, there's resources that I've come across instructionals from different parts of the world where the video is not in English per se. It could be in Japanese, French, and so on. I guess what I'm asking is, do you know if there's any other series? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but do you know if there's any other instructional series that are non-English that you would recommend, be it if it's Japanese instructional or from anywhere else in the world?
Not really, I mean, they are not unlike BJJ, which has a lot of resources, right? There are a lot of websites selling BJJ instructionals, tons, right? In judo, there are not a lot of sources of that. There's fighting films, right? There's the American Judo System by Jamie Pedro and Travis Stevens, and there's this thing called, I'm sure you've heard of it, Judo Fanatics, which Travis Stevens is involved in, and that one, they've got a lot of titles as well, and that's basically it. I mean, you've got a few other odd sites that sell judo videos, but these three are the main resources of videos. There are some there are some video productions from Japan, but they're not online. They're actually DVDs that you have to buy. You could buy them from Amazon Japan, but they're very expensive. And like I said, they tend to show very traditional judo. You buy a DVD from a great champion and you hope to see how he did it in the Olympics or the World Championships, and then you watch it and it's like he's showing me Kodokan Judo, and you feel that you've just wasted your money. So I mean, there are several series of do you know this great late champion Koga? Have you heard of him?
Yes, of course. Yeah,
yeah. He passed away a few years ago. And he's done a whole bunch of videos. I mean, he's done many different series of videos, DVDs in Japan, and he's done one with fighting films, and the one with fighting films is the best. I mean, because the one in fighting films, he's showing what he did in competition, right? But I have bought DVDs of Koga from Japan, which is in Japanese, right? And he's showing techniques that he doesn't do. I mean, he's showing ouchigari. I've never seen him do ouchigari. He's showing uchimata, haraigoshi. These are not techniques that he does, so he's just like sort of teaching basic judo, and I didn't buy a Koga DVD to learn basic judo from him. That's not the purpose of buying a Koga DVD. I want to see how he did it at the Olympics,
Right.
So I wouldn't really recommend Japanese DVDs unless Japanese videos that are made by fighting films. Those are good.
Yeah, and I just one last thing before we transition to the following question. I remember also seeing the Mongolians featured on fighting films on their series just to show their style of judo. And again, I thought that was a great addition to their collection, because
all their videos are great. I think all their videos. I mean, production qualities are, absolutely, broadcast quality. Is the yeah.
In the article,
technical as well. The production values are really good, but it's not just good production values. The direction and everything is good. I mean, I do recommend it highly.
For sure. We're just going to move on to the next question here. In the article, you've expressed some skepticism about the ongoing utility of uchikomi once a throw is learned. Can you elaborate more on this and explain why this traditional practice might not be as valuable in modern judo training?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit of heresy on my part, right? Because if you go to any judo club, right, 99.9% of judo clubs will say, do more uchikomi, do more uchikomi. Uchikomi is essential. You have to do uchikomi. I remember, people saying things like, yeah, uchikomi is like, doing uchikomi is like sharpening a knife. If you have a knife and it becomes dull, and then you do more uchikomi, it becomes sharp. So that's the perception. But and indeed, the Japanese do a lot of uchikomi. So people see the Japanese doing uchikomi, do as the Japanese do because they're so great in judo. But just because they do that doesn't mean that they're great because of it, right? They might be great in spite of it, right? It's just like, people could say, oh, Tom Cruise is a Scientologist, right? Is he a great filmmaker and a great actor because of Scientology, or is he great in spite of it, right? He might have been a great actor even if he was a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Christian or a Muslim or whatever, right? But he happens to be a Scientologist, and of course he ascribes his success to Scientology, but maybe it's not because of Scientology. Maybe he's just a great actor and he's a great filmmaker, right? So the Japanese might do tons of uchikomi, but maybe that's not the reason why they're so successful. Maybe it's because they do 2 hours of randori a day, right? On top of the 1 hour. Just because they do uchikomi doesn't mean that that's the reason they're successful, right? And I'm convinced that that's not the reason that they're successful, because you see, uchikomi, I mean, for the uninitiated, those who are listening, they may not know what this means. Uchikomi is, I guess, the loosely translated as fit-ins, right? It's when you do the entry into a technique and you lift the person, but you don't finish the throw. You don't actually throw. When you throw, it's called nagekomi, right? That's when you finish the throw and you actually do the full movement. Uchikomi is half a movement. You come in, you enter, and then you abort, right? So that's uchikomi. And it's useful when you're first learning a technique. When you're first learning a technique like ippon seoinage, right? A back carry throw. You need to learn how to enter into the throw, how to get the rotation, how to lift the person onto your back. You need to get that feeling. And you get that feeling through uchikomi. In that regard, uchikomi is very useful for you to learn the entry into the throw. It's very useful. What I'm saying is that once you've learned it, once you've mastered it, right? Like, for example, ippon seoinage is a technique I use, and I know it inside out. It's a technique that I know well. Why should I do uchikomi? There's no use. I already know it. The purpose of uchikomi is to teach you the entry into the technique. I already know the entry into the technique. Why do I need to do uchikomi when I already know the entry into the technique? So what I need to do is more randori. That's what I need to do. I need to fight people who are able to defend my seoinage, and then I need to come up with new ways to overcome those defenses, new ways to overcome counters to my seoinage. Uchikomi will do me no good. I already know the technique. If I already know the technique, I don't need to, like let's say you already know how to cook a dish, right? You're learning cooking, and you learn to cook your favorite dish. You've already learned it. You've already mastered it. You've been cooking that dish for 10 years. Do you need to read the recipe book again? You don't. You've already cooked it for 10 years.
Right.
Right? You need that recipe book, and you need to learn the basics of cooking a dish when it's new to you. If I give you a new dish, you've never cooked it before, then you need the recipe, and then you need the methodology, right? But if you've been cooking it for 10 years or 20 years, you don't need the recipe book. So what I'm saying is that uchikomi is useless once you've already mastered the technique, And in fact, like I said, it's very useful for learning the entry into the technique, but that's all it teaches you, the entry. It doesn't even teach you how to finish the technique. To finish the technique, you need to do nagekomi. All right? So you have to do uchikomi, learn the entry, then you have to do nagekomi to learn the finishing. But uchikomi and nagekomi alone can't possibly be enough, because these are done against or on a cooperative partner, right? So in order to learn how to really do the throw, you have to do it against an uncooperative partner, a resisting partner. And that happens in randori. So randori is crucial.
quick follow-ups here. There regarding randori. You mentioned that the Japanese will do this is on the national team. They'll do 2 hours of randori, right?
Yeah.
Is that? I guess what I'm asking is, can you paint the picture from what you know in terms of their schedule, their training schedule? Are you saying they do randori, 2 hours of randori 7 days a week?
Yes,
In
they do it
addition,
practically every day. They might take maybe half a day off on Sunday. Some clubs might do that, but basically every day they do about an hour and a half to 2 hours of randori. They also do the Japanese spend a huge amount of time on warm-ups. The warm-ups can last anywhere from half an hour to an hour. Really, a lot of warm-ups, which Western judokas are not used to, because we don't do so much warm-ups. Like at my club, we don't really do a lot of warm-ups, right? They come in, we just warm up a little bit, we get going, with the program. But the Japanese, they do a lot of warm-ups. It's just part of the tradition. And so if you're not used to that, you might find it a little bit boring. But then you see, at that level, when you're talking about national team level, high level judo, they've all got their techniques already. They just need to do the randori, right? They just need to do the randori, and so they don't really spend a lot of time on technical and stuff like that anymore. They go in there. It's just really randori heavy, right? They do a lot of randori, and that's the secret to their success. If you do that much randori, you get really good.
And I know this is a big leap when I make this statement here, and because when you say 2 hours of randori a day, obviously that's incredible, right? I mean, the average person, if the average person did that for a week, I mean, I don't know if they would be able to move on the 8th day. And I mean, we're comparing apples and oranges here, folks. So
I should point out. I mean, this is something that I heard Jimmy Pedro speak about in a podcast that he did, where is that the randori that is done in Japan is actually a little bit different from the randori that is done in Europe, right? Because in Europe it's very physical. It's very physical. It almost feels like a competition. The randori is really hard. I mean, I trained in Europe, and there were times, for example, when fist fights would break out. I mean, it was that hard. I mean, I was in one session in the Budokwai in London when
Wow.
actually Neil Adams students came, and I was from the Camberley Club, and the Camberley Club was there, and there were other players from different clubs, and there was one time one of my friends got into a fist fight in the middle of a randori with one of Neil Adams' students, and they were throwing punches. We had to break it up and all that because it was that rough. It's really hard physical randori, and you can't possibly do 2 hours of that. But in Japan, the randori is a little bit different. It's more free flowing. It's not so hardcore. They're trying out stuff. It's a lot of free flow, and also they like to do this one thing, which is colloquially called motodachi, where they put somebody out there, who's the motodachi, and he stays out there for an hour, I mean, or more, just taking on new partners, right? So without any rest, without any water breaks, you're just out there for an hour, taking on new partners every 5 minutes or whatever. And so how can you possibly do that, right? The only way you can do that is to conserve your energy. And when you're fighting, you're not going all out, headbutting and going, brutal and all that. You're doing free flow. You're a little bit more defensive and conserving your energy. And so it's a different type of randori. It's 2 hours, but it's not 2 hours of European style randori. It's not. It's different. Like I said, more free flowing and more. I'm not sure if this is the right term to use, but a little bit more relaxed. A little bit more relaxed and free flowing compared to the European style of randori.
Either way, it sounds like a lot of calories are being burned in those 2 hours over.
It's not hard. Yeah, it's not hard. 2 hours, but it's good. I believe in that. I believe in that. And I think that it's good to do a lot of randori. You just got to do a lot of randori. I mean, it's like in any sport, right? I mean, if you're talking about soccer, right? You can do drills, sure. You do drills, you do strength training, you do speed work, but you've got to play soccer. You've got to get onto the field and play soccer to become good at soccer, right? If you want to be a swimmer, right? Sure, they have drills that they do and strength training and different types of exercises. But at the end of the day, you've got to swim, right? If you're a marathon runner, you can do, strength training and stretching and drills and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you got to hit the road and you got to run. If you're a basketball player, lots of drills, lots of, exercises, but you've got to play basketball, right? So what is playing judo? Playing judo is randori. So if you want to get good at judo, you've got to spend a lot of time doing randori. No two ways around it.
Quick follow-up before I give you the next question here, before I ask you the next question. How much randori does KL Judo? How much do you guys do?
Okay, at the moment, we don't do as much as I would like for us to do. We try to do a minimum of half an hour, minimum. But, on a good day when we have the right number of people and the right type of people, then we could do an hour, right? But that is quite rare because right now, we're a small club. We don't have a lot of people. And what I mean by the right type of people is, let's say you have a class on a particular day and, 70% of the class or 60% of the class are beginners. White belts who don't have technique. You can't do an hour of randori, right? They don't have the techniques to do randori. But in contrast, let's say you have a class and it's 90% experienced players, black belts, brown belts, blue belts, or green belts, people with experience, people who have technique, right? And everybody, 90 to 100% of the class is experienced. Then you can have more randori. So you have to cater to the class. If the class has a lot of beginners, you can't do so much randori.
Right.
And so it depends on the number of people that's available and also the level of the people who are present. I mean, obviously, if you only have 3 people on the mat on that day, you can't do that much, right? You could recycle and go round robin and okay, let's do the same randori 5, 7, 9, 10 times with the same partner. You could do that, and sometimes we do that, but you want to have variety if possible, right? If possible, you don't want to just do 10 randoris with the same person, right? If you have to, you do it, but ideally you have different partners to randori with, but sometimes the number of people on the mat is not there. Yeah, so
right.
So my hope is that over time we will grow the club so that 2 things happen. Number one, we have more people, just the number of people increases, and also more, a higher number of experienced people, so that we could have, maybe even a day that's designated just for randori, and we just do 2 hours of randori like the Japanese. I would love that, if we could do that. Okay. Today, Wednesday, is a randori day. All right, we only do randori. I would love that. But it will take time. You have to grow your club to a point where you have sufficient number of members and, a sufficient number of experienced players.
In the article, and in terms of adaptation and variation, how does a judoka adapt? Let me repeat that. How does a judoka adapt a throw to a different opponent with various body types and strategies? And how much variations from the learned technique is advisable to make it work in different contexts?
Okay, great question. I think one of the biggest mistakes that beginners make is that if they've successfully developed a technique against a specific training partner, let's say I'm training with you and I've been working with you for weeks or months on a technique. Let's say it's Seoi Nage, right? And I've been working with you and I've managed to figure out a version of Seoi Nage that works on you. Whenever we randori, I usually catch you once or twice with it. and it works really well for you. But you're of a certain body type, a certain weight, a certain height. It doesn't mean that that technique will work on another person who is a different body type, different weight, different height, different movement styles, and it would be a mistake to try to use the exact same technique on another person with a different body type. But that's a common mistake that beginners make, and sometimes it can be actually dangerous. Okay, for example, let's say you do seoinage against, let's say you're a 60-kilo player and you do it against another 60-kilo player. You do that particular seoinage and it works, right? And then you meet, sometimes in the dojo, you have to fight somebody bigger. That's quite common. And you happen to go up against a guy who's 90 kilos, 60 kilos and 90 kilos, right? By right, you should be focusing on ashiwaza, foot sweeps, and slightly more defensive type things. And you come in for a seoinage, you get crushed by the 90-kilo guy. If the 90-kilo guy is not, if he's experienced, he'll know how to avoid injuring you. What if he's not experienced? And you come in and try to throw him and he crushes you. You could break up some bones, or worse, right? Because you're doing the technique that works on a 60-kilo guy. It's not going to work on a 90-kilo guy. You got to do something else, right? Maybe you need to do drop seoinage, or maybe you need to do, a different version, not the version that works on a 60-kilo player. Or maybe seoinage may not work against a 90-kilo guy. Maybe you need to focus on other techniques. You can't fight everybody the same way, right? But so your question is that how many different variations? I don't think that there's a number. I mean, every person you fight is different, and through trial and error, doing lots of randori, you figure out ways to make it work. If I'm fighting you for the first time, I don't know how you move, I don't know how you feel, and I've just got to do trial and error. I'll get countered, I'll get blocked, and then eventually over time, I'll figure out a way to penetrate your defenses and get my technique to work. But there's no limit. I mean, if I've got 10 different training partners, maybe I have to come up with 10 different variations. Not major differences. Sometimes it's just a small difference. Maybe a little bit different in terms of the gripping. Maybe a little bit deeper entry. Maybe a little bit wider entry. Maybe a drop. It's not something very radical. Maybe it's just a small tweak just to make it work.
In the article, you mentioned the importance of complementary throws, right? You touched on the concept of having complementary throws, like coupling the ippon seoinage and the kuchimaki komi.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on the process of selecting and integrating these complementary techniques?
Okay, so in the world of judo, complementary throws, or throws that go well together with throws that go well together are quite well established. Right? You don't really have to discover them. Like, for example, if you ask any experienced competitive coach, what can I do? What can I do with my ippon seoinage? Right? The coach will tell you, kuchimaki komi. Right? That's a very established throw that goes well with ippon seoinage. Right? They might say, do ippon osoto. That works well as well. And so, for any throw that you mentioned, there are, a number of complementary throws that are well established. And if you have a good coach, or you have good video resources that you can refer to, fighting films, the Jimmy Pedro stuff that I mentioned, they'll show you what those complementary throws are. So you don't have to discover them or invent them. They're pretty established. These are all very well established, and you'll see them also on on videos put out by the IJF, right? The IJF World Tour. You watch the World Tour, you'll see players doing complementary throws, right? And you can get ideas from there. But like I said, these are well established. There's no need to try to invent something new. You just have to do a little bit of research and you can figure them out, right? Okay, I do Uchimata. What goes well with Uchimata? These are all established. Kochigari goes well with Uchimata, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
If I could just no pun intended, I guess, throw in something in here, like in terms of what if we're talking about the IGF circuit, and you mentioned these sequence of throws, these complementary throws are well established. Which, in your opinion, which country or competitor comes to mind when you think of the most unexpected sequence of complementary throws that you wouldn't expect? Do you know what I mean? Like
unorthodox.
Yeah, like which when you see it, you're like, this makes it's amazing that this even worked. It's almost luck. It's an anomaly in the sense that it's just too random to make sense. Which country or player has the most unconventional sequence or trajectory? I know a lot of it is situational. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I think the most conventional ones would be Japan, of course, right?
Right.
Japan are really good at combinations, but very classical and it's expected, right? I would say a lot of in general unorthodox judo, not just combinations, but unorthodox judo comes from places like Georgia, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, to a certain extent, Russia as well. These type of places, they produce Mongolia, right? Very unorthodox judo, right? Sometimes you see unorthodox stuff come out of Korea as well. Sometimes you do see that, but interestingly, a lot of these, a lot of judo from so-called Western democracies are actually quite kind of orthodox. American judo is very influenced by Japanese judo. Canadian judo is very influenced by Japanese. So is Brazilian judo. And you go to when you go to France and Germany and Spain and the UK, a lot of the judo is pretty conventional relative to what you see from Georgia or Azerbaijan or Mongolia or Kazakhstan. I mean, of course, you have the occasional player who's very unorthodox from France or from Germany, and so on. But in general, the judo in these Western democracies tend to be more classical, actually. If you look at Neil Adams' judo, I mean, this is some time back, but Neil Adams' judo was very classical, very beautiful classical judo. It wasn't unorthodox, And if you look at Mike Swain from the United States, he was the first American male world champion. It's very Japanese style judo. In fact, he trained in Japan, and his judo is very classical, very beautiful. I mean, from Canada, this Kyle Reyes fella, his judo is very beautiful classical judo, So not very unorthodox at all. So if you want to see very unusual judo, it'll be from places like Georgia and so on.
Years ago, when I started watching, international judo and stuff, a lot of the times it was just clips, to be honest, on YouTube that was available. And I remember, this is not that long ago, but it's long ago enough. Do you remember Sobirov?
Yeah, Rishon Sobirov.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, like, holy moly, this is just incredible to watch this guy just move like that and just be, I mean, if you want to call it unconventional or whatnot, but it was just so dynamic, so explosive, it was I gotta find that clip. There was one highlight. I love those highlights, but I remember seeing that highlight and my mind just went like, anyways, so moving on. I appreciate that answer there. I want to move on to the topic of, and you kind of mentioned this before. I hope you don't mind us diving deeper into this. Japanese champions teaching classical versions, and you mentioned this in your article. this might be a touchy subject, but what are the cultural or traditional reasons behind Japanese champions often teaching classical versions of their favorite techniques? I know you spoke about this already, but a follow-up to that I want to know is how do you perceive this practice impact? How do you perceive this practice impacts the global evolution of judo?
Okay, so the first part of your question is that why they do it? Is that the first part of the question?
Correct.
Why they? As I had mentioned earlier, I did ask Shintaro, right, who's Japanese American and has some connection to Japan, and he's gone to Japan and trained in Japan. He's Japanese, and his father is, of course, very traditional Japanese judo instructor. Asked him why, and he says he's not sure himself, but it's what they do, right? And if I had to speculate, I think the reason has to do with just tradition. They feel an obligation to demonstrate the traditional technique, because they all respect the Kodokan. The Kodokan has an established official traditional version of the technique, and they feel a kind of obligation or a duty to present the classical version. And maybe they feel it's wrong to show an unorthodox version. It's okay to do it in competition and get an ippon and win a gold medal, but it's not okay to show it. I'm just guessing. I mean, but definitely it is a fact. I mean, you can ask anybody who's a connoisseur of videos if they, about Japanese judo videos. It's always very disappointing because a lot of the times they just don't show the way it's actually done, but they show the classical way. It's very frustrating. Right. So the second part of your question was, how does this impact the development of judo worldwide? Right. I think it actually has a negative impact because a lot of senseis, a lot of teachers are very influenced by this classical approach, and they teach things where in some cases, I mean, the best example I can give is that of Ippon Seoinage, right? And Ippon Seoinage, the classical way of doing Ippon Seoinage is to throw with a grip on uke's sleeve. But internationally in competitions, everybody does it off the lapel grip, not the sleeve grip. I mean, if you watch it, 95% of the times, it's off the lapel, not the sleeve. You'll find an occasion. I mean, this is not to say it can't be done off the sleeve. It's just not as efficient, right? So people will point out, oh yeah, okay, there's a clip of Ricky Nakaya doing it off the sleeve. So it can be done off the sleeve. Yes, of course it can be done. But 95% or maybe 99% of Ippon Seoinage, whether it's standing or drop, is done off the lapel. It's not done off the sleeve. But 99% of teachers out there will teach it off the sleeve. So why do they do that? Because they watch these Japanese champions teach it off the sleeve. Right? So it does have a negative impact. They should be teaching it the proper way, or rather they should be teaching it not the proper way. Maybe the proper way is defined by the Kodokan, right? Which is to do it off the sleeve. I should say they should teach it the most effective way, which is the way it is done in competition, right? If it's done in competition, by definition, it's the most efficient, effective way. That's why it's done in competition, right? That's why it works in competition. If it wasn't effective and it wasn't efficient, it wouldn't work, right? So if you watch how it's done in competition, it's done off the lapel. It's not done off the sleeve. But like I said, you go to 99 out of 100 clubs, the sensei will teach Seoinage off the sleeve. And that's a direct impact of these Japanese champions and Japanese senseis teaching the classical version. The irony is that all these Japanese players do it off the lapel as well. They don't do it off the sleeve. Koga does it off the lapel. Abinuma does it off the lapel. when Nomura does Ippon Seoinage, he mainly does Morote Seoinage, but when he does Ippon Seoinage, it's off the lapel. You know, all the players who do Seoinage do it off the lapel. But it's taught there off the sleeve, right? So that's a problem. And that's just one example. There are other examples I could give, you know, of Osotogari. The way Osotogari is taught is not the way it's done in competition. The traditional way is taught is not the way it's done in competition. So there are lots of examples of that, right? And I think this is a problem. I think it does negatively impact the way judo is taught and developed around the world.
You know, I'm gonna have to move on from this topic because I have so many follow-up questions to ask, and really open the, as they say, the Pandora's box of just because it's there's just so much there, you know. And I speak as a fan, folks. You know, I a fan of this sport, but also looking at it from a different perspective of why is that? Like it's just it's bizarre, you know, and I say that respectfully.
It is bizarre. No, it is bizarre.
I have as I'm sure you do as well. I have people that I know, people that I respect who are they love the traditional style, and I'm not knocking any of that, but I would say you know, if you look at other sports, what would be the most similar analogy, as you mentioned, the vis-a-vis the sleeve versus the lapel? I guess from a communication perspective, what analogy could we use? It doesn't have to be sports related, but like, because it sounds to me you're describing a scenario where in competition that is the most realistic scenario you can get.
No, I tell you, I've had this conversation with one of my students before who was learning competition judo, and we came up with this conclusion. This is going to be controversial, and many will say it's heresy, but I would say that judo stands out as probably the only sport, the only Olympic sport, where the way it is taught in most clubs, right, it's not the way the game is played. Right. Whereas, you know, in other Olympic sports, right, you're taught the way it's played. You're not taught a classical version that doesn't really apply in competition. You're taught the competition version in virtually every other sport. But judo stands alone as a unique case where how it is taught is often very different from how it is played. Judo stands alone in that regard. So it's hard for me to give you an analogy from another sport because other sports don't do this. So you know, and the irony, like I said, is that, you know, these Japanese champions, they'll demonstrate all the classical versions, but if you watch how they actually fight, it's not the classical version. It's not classical at all, right? So you know this this player, this great 60-kilo player named Takato. Does that name?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
His judo is very unusual, very unorthodox, very interesting, but quite unusual, especially
he got caught in a Jujigatami, right?
Yeah, yeah. But you know, he does side takedown and he does, you know, very, very unusual front uchimata and stuff like that, right? I've never seen him give a clinic or whatever, but it'd be interesting. I mean, if he were to give a clinic, he might just very well teach classical judo, you know. And to me, that would be endlessly frustrating because if I were to go for Takato clinic, I want to see how he does all those amazing competition techniques. I'm not there to watch him do classical techniques, you know, but that's what often happens. So yeah, I mean, you know, that's just the way it is, and I think it has a negative impact. And like I say, I stand by what I just said, which is that judo probably stands alone as the only Olympic sport where the way it is taught is often at odds with the way it is played. And you don't see that in other sports.
That statement is fascinating, and it's obviously factual, right? But it's also ironic, and I don't know what other keywords. Frustrating for sure to some extent. And I mean, not everyone who trains the sport necessarily gets to or wants to compete, be it at a recreational or competitive, level all the way to the worlds or to the Olympics. I mean, the probability of that is very slim. But the fact that it's not being taught the way it's played is mind-boggling. This morning I just finished watching the FIFA World Cup Women's Colombia versus England, and I just thought about what you said. The way the game is taught is not the way it's played, and I'm like, could you imagine any other sport?
No, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in any other sport. It doesn't happen. Judo stands alone.
That's it. Even archery or those sorts of sports,
it's taught the way it's played.
Right.
It's taught the way. Right. Every other sport is taught the way it's played. Judo stands alone in that, because I've tried to think of, is there any other sport where it's not taught the way it's played? And I can't come up with anything. And so Judo stands alone in that sense. And it's very frustrating. But what can you do? I mean, that's how it is.
For sure. I hope you write more about that, because I find that really as someone who likes the content you produce, I find that fascinating, from as a sports fan who watches other sports, that fact about this sport in terms of how it's trained, like there's something really ironic but magical about it. Now, I want to move on to the next question here, where we're talking about emphasizing full force practice with safety. In the article, you emphasize throwing with 100% force and utilizing a crash pad. How can instructors cultivate an environment where students can practice with full force but also ensure safety?
Well,
and sorry, but before you answer, I don't mean to rudely interrupt. I remember that part in the article really stood out to me, where the 100% force. And I think you went on I should be quoting you directly from the article, but there's a part where you talk about, like, if you're not going 100%, you'll never know. I'm paraphrasing here, correct me if I'm wrong, but you won't know what it feels to fully throw an opponent, right? And I found that really interesting.
Well, you see, in many judo, again, this classical thing comes into play, where we just talked about how the way it is taught or the way it's practiced is not the way it is played, right? Well, this has direct relevance to your question here. In many judo clubs, not in all, but in many judo clubs, they don't use crash pads. Certainly in traditional judo clubs, they don't use crash pads, right? So when players throw, when do throwing practice, when they do nage komi, when they're doing repeated throwing practice, what they do to save their uke from being battered, right, is that they'll lift a little bit. They'll throw, and just as the uke is about to impact on the ground, they actually literally lift up to cushion the impact, right? If not, if you throw somebody with Ippon Seonagi 20 times with full impact, they'll die, I mean, they'll be in the hospital. I mean, you can't take 20 throws, repeatedly without a crash pad, right? So when they do it, they lift a little bit so that it cushions the impact, right? But that's not the way you throw. That's not how you learn to throw, right? So we've had visitors come to our judo club before who come from dojos where they don't use crash pads. And although we had a crash pad in place, a thick crash pad, and we said, throw with all your might, just go all out, there's a crash pad. Don't worry about it. Psychologically, they could not get themselves to do it. They could not, because they don't want to hurt their opponent, their partner. And I told them, your partner is going to be fine. There's a crash pad to cushion the impact, but they couldn't bring themselves to do it. They would actually lift a little bit, or they'll try to cushion the throw, even though they know a crash pad is there because they've just been conditioned, that way. And so if you do that repeatedly, and that's your habit of holding yourself back when you throw, how are you going to become a good thrower, right? In randori and so on, you can't finish the throw because you've never done it full force. So you've got to do it full force. That's why at my dojo we have tons of crash pads. We have more crash pads per capita than any other judo club I know. We have tons of crash pads, really, really tons of crash pads, and we make full use of them. And because of that, our players can do lots of nage-kobe. Our players can throw full force, and they can do lots of them because the uke doesn't get hurt. Uke has a crash pad there to save them, and so so how do you cultivate that? Well, if a sensei or a coach wants to cultivate that, he needs to invest in crash pads. And we have actually different types of crash pads. We have very thick crash pads for big throws, standing ippon seonage, uranage, uchimata, big throws, right? Where the opponent flies through the air and lands, slam on the mat. We have thick crash pads. We even have thin crash pads for drop seonage, for drop techniques, or techniques where the impact is not so hard, but it's more of a drop, right? Or a rolling technique, right? More of a rolling technique. Then we use thin crash pads. So we have different types of crash pads, and we have lots of them.
It's interesting because I've seen the videos on the KL Judo Instagram of you guys utilizing the various crash pads. And I've never actually seen the small. You have like the big crash pads, and then you have different sizes. I'm only familiar with the big ones, like they're about, say, maybe a foot, 30 centimeters or something like that. No, pardon me, more than that, more like 2 feet. So like the larger crash pads.
Yeah.
Anyways, I've only seen those in terms of around here, but I've never seen all the various different sizes.
Yeah.
It's cool that you guys have a lot. I had a follow-up question in regards.
Well, I gotta tell you a story, an interesting story about this, to show you how this traditional attitude about not using crash pad prevails, right? I posted these videos on YouTube and social media and so on.
Right.
And somebody somewhere, commentator posted something. I think it was on YouTube or maybe it was Facebook or something like that. And he says, "Very nice throws, you guys, but why do your players use crash pads? Don't they know how to break fall?" And so I mean, I didn't even bother to respond, right? Because it's obviously a sarcastic comment, and
Right.
I mean, it has nothing to do with whether you know how to break fall or not. We're gonna throw our partner 30 times or 50 times. They better use a crash pad,
Right.
If they don't use a crash pad, we have to take our partner out in a stretcher.
That's right.
So yeah. So but that type of comment, yeah. So that type of comment tells you the prevailing attitude. Oh, great throws, guy, but great throws, guys. But don't your players know how to break fall? I mean, come on. What does that have to do with break fall, right? I mean, if you do an uranage, or what's a habarelli technique?
Oh yes, yeah.
Imagine a habarelli technique or a uranage, and try doing that 10 times on a mat without a crash pad, right?
Do not do that without a crash pad timeout.
Exactly. Right? But it doesn't have to be a throw that big. I mean, even say oinage or tayatoshi. You throw somebody 20 times with tayatoshi, they'll be black and blue.
That's right.
And you want to have a training partner the next day, right? So,
there's so much there.
Sorry, one more story. Sorry, gotta tell you one more story. I'm a coach from Germany. From back in the day when I was training, I was training in Germany, and this coach was telling me about his time in Japan, and he used to train in Japan in the 60s. He was a competitor from Germany, and one of his of the people that he got to know at that time was a legendary Japanese Olympic champion named Isao Okano. I'm not sure if you've heard of that name.
I've
It's
heard the
legendary.
name,
Yeah, legendary person. But Okano, he went on sort of like a clinic tour with Okano, who was demonstrating techniques. And Okano used him as a uke. And they didn't use crash pads, of course, because in Japan they don't believe in crash pads. So Okano would throw him to there, slam, boom, slam, boom, right? Repeatedly throughout the crash pad. And he said that the next day, one side of his body was all black and blue because of all those throws. So that's not the way. That's not the way. That's the traditional way, but we certainly don't do it in KL Judo. That's not the way. I mean, you don't want your partners to be black and blue.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure, there's risk of injury, being severely sore and hurt, as well as potentially.
Even if it's not injury, right? No, I'm not talking about breaking bones, whatever. But imagine being slammed to the ground 20 times,
Yeah, it's a big issue for sure if you're not landing safely.
It's different when you get thrown in randori, because in randori it doesn't hurt because adrenaline's flowing.
Right.
Adrenaline's flowing, and somehow even if you get slammed, it doesn't really hurt because that adrenaline sort of protects you. But when you're doing nagekomi, there's no adrenaline flowing, and it does hurt, unless there's a crash pad. Right. Yeah.
And of course, you're emphasizing here for the record, we're just saying that you're emphasizing when you're throwing 100%, right?
Yes.
You should consider the
usage. Which is the only way you should throw. You should never throw 90%. You should never throw 80%. You should never throw 95%. My philosophy is that if you're going to throw, you throw 100%. And the only way you can do that safely without hurting your partner is to use crash pads.
Right. I think I had another follow-up question. I don't want to forget it. I should have written it down. Oh yes, the risk of concussion is another thing, right? I mean, if you're landing 10, 20 times and you're on the mats, you're being thrown at, as you mentioned, 100% full force. I mean, there's a lot of risks, right? If you're not landing on a crash pad. Of course, the assumption is one knows how to break their fall, but why put them through so much punishment?
Exactly.
And not have them land on a crash pad. May I ask, where in Germany did you train? Which city?
I trained at the Rüsselsheim Olympic Training Center, which is quite near Frankfurt.
Okay, interesting. We're going to move on to the next question here. I'm hoping that the other question I had comes back. It might come back, hopefully. Okay. In terms of timeline and commitment to master a throw, while it's challenging to put a timeline on mastery, quote unquote, can you discuss the common pitfalls that might delay progress? And a follow-up with that, what are the habits or trait of those who seem to learn more quickly?
Right. Good question. Great question. I think the biggest mistake a player can make is to be hesitant to try techniques in randori for fear that it would fail or for fear that they will get countered. Some people are very afraid of getting countered, and some people just are afraid that it won't work. They feel that if I do a technique, it should work. If it doesn't work, then it's a failure and I don't want to fail, right? That's the wrong mindset. You got to fail many times. You got to try, and I often tell my players that every time your technique doesn't work, you're learning something new. You're learning yet another way the technique doesn't work. So if you keep on doing it, eventually you'll run out of ways for the technique not to work. And then you'll come up with a way for it to work, right? So you just got to try. You've got to try until it finally works, until you come up with a way to make it work. And there is, I do see this phenomena among certain players where there's a hesitancy to try the very techniques that they want to master. Somebody could say, I would like to develop the side takedown, or I would like to develop a seoi nage, but they don't try it. If you don't try it, how are you going to ever develop it? Right? So, and then on the other hand, you do have those players who are very adventurous and they will try anything. You teach them something in randori, they'll try it. You don't even have to remind them. You don't even have to say, hey, make sure you try it. They'll try it. And those are the ones who pick up techniques quite fast because they're willing to try. So right. The biggest pitfall, biggest mistake is to be hesitant to try in randori.
What kind of athletes do you like to coach as a coach? What are the characteristics you look for in your athletes? And if you could kind of give us an idea of, who would you like to ideally coach?
Okay, another great question. You're a master interviewer. You've come up really prepared. I think these are great questions because I think these are things that need to be addressed, right? And these are things that people need to know about and people want to know about, right? Okay, so when you say what kind of athletes do I like to coach? Are you talking about competitive athletes who?
Absolutely, competitive.
You're not talking about recreational, right? Because
no, not at all. No, I'm looking at your content. I'm reading the stuff.
Competition.
Yeah, right, and okay. Man, who is your ideal?
In a competitive scenario, right? In a context of a competitor who wants to go for IJF or maybe wants to go to world level, is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's say an athlete tells me, Coach, I want to go take my judo as far as I can possibly take it. If possible, world level, if possible, Olympic level, right? If an athlete tells me that, this is the first thing I would ask them, and I borrowed this from a coach named Nick Saban, right? It's something that I saw on social media. Nick Saban, and he says, first thing he asked them is that, do you know what you want exactly, right? And they might say, yeah, I want to be a national champion, or I want to be a regional champion, or I want to be world champion, or they usually know what they want. Then he asked them this very crucial question: do you know what that entails? And I would say 99% of the time, they don't know what it entails. Most of the time, they grossly underestimate what it entails. And they think that, oh, yeah, maybe I'll train 3 times a week and, I'll become world champion. No, you won't become world champion training 3 times a week. You won't become world champion training 5 times a week. You got to train full time, right? If you want to be world champion. So a lot of people grossly underestimate what it takes. Whatever their goals may be, most people grossly underestimate. Some realize what it takes, and then but they're a minority. And so the kind of athlete that I would like to train, and my answer might surprise you, because you might think that I would describe somebody who's naturally talented and all this. No, it's all about mindset. To me, it's all about mindset. It's an athlete who knows what he or she wants, knows what it entails, and is prepared to do what it entails. That more so than physical attributes, more so than natural talent and all these. Those are useful. Somebody with natural talent and strong aptitude and physicality. Of course, every coach wants to have a very athletic person who who's very agile and fast and has strong aptitude and has natural talent. Every coach wants that, but more so than all these physical attributes is the mindset, the mentality that I know what I want, I know what it entails, and I'm prepared to do what it entails. I'm prepared to make the commitment. I'm prepared to make the sacrifices. Right? If I can find an athlete like that, that's the athlete I want.
Wow. Do you offer virtual coaching? Like, have people reached out to you and said, hey, I want to talk to you. I want to discuss the scenario right now with my judo. Here's what's working. Here's what's not working. This is my intended goal. How can you help me? Do you offer that?
I don't currently offer that in any kind of formal capacity, but because I put a lot of stuff online through the website, social media, sometimes people will message me out of the blue, from other places, sometimes from other states in Malaysia, sometimes from out of the country, and ask questions. And sometimes it does lead to interesting conversations. But sometimes I sometimes I can't really help them because I of the type of questions they ask. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. A guy, used to write to me and say, I'm in this dojo here in, my hometown, and, how can I train to be more explosive? And how can I train to develop more anaerobic capacity? I mean, these type of stuff, for one thing, you can just Google online and look it up, right?
Right.
And then secondly, I don't know you see, I'm also very careful to offer advice when they come from another dojo, and that dojo may have its own culture, and their sensei may be very sensitive about how about their players getting advice from other coaches and all that. So I when somebody tells me things like that, they're from this dojo and they're not really getting what they want and they want advice from me, I'm a little bit careful about offering advice there, right? But where I've had good conversations is from individuals who are actually quite well versed with judo, but and they know the players on the IGF circuit, and they actually have a decent understanding of judo, and they're not asking very general, broad questions like, how can I improve my throws? That's too broad. Right. They might ask me. Where I find it interesting is that sometimes they'll send me a clip and they say, Takato is, doing this move. Is he just being opportunistic, or does that look like a planned move to you? And did he engineer it? Right. And then I will look at the clip and then I'll give him my opinion. So those kind of stuff I find interesting. But what I don't find interesting is, like, for example, there was one guy who saw some clips that we did on YouTube, and he will post something like, "Can you get one of your students to demonstrate Sankaku Jime? I want to learn Sankaku Jime." I said, "Can't you Google that? I mean, why are you asking me to purposely make a clip of Sankaku Jime for you? I mean, that type of stuff I'm not interested in entertaining, but if somebody shows me a clip and says, "Wow, have you seen this move before? What is he actually doing? Was that grip an anomaly, or is that something that he's deliberately does, to as a precursor to an attack?" Okay, that type of conversation I like to have. So I don't get a lot of those, but sometimes it does happen, and I find those interesting. But I don't offer it in any formal capacity. But I do surprisingly get, questions occasionally from people from around the world, who would send questions and ask me some things. Not such detailed questions as your well-crafted questions, but yeah, I do get questions.
I appreciate that answer. I'm sure you get a lot of questions. I see some of these questions sometimes on
Not
your.
a lot, not a lot, not a lot. It's not like I'm barraged with questions.
No,
But really people do ask. Yes.
Pardon me, I meant to say also comments. Sometimes there are comments that people will leave, and of course, you run the KL Judo blog, but you also have other well-known judo.
JudoCrazy.
That's right, judo related content. And I guess I didn't have this in my original set of questions here, and our interview's almost done, but I want to know, in terms of ignorance in the martial arts / judo community, as someone who's been following the sport and communicating on it and reporting on it, do you find there's a lot of ignorance based on some comments that you see, like, oh, they know how to break falls, right? So why are they using crash pad? Like, sure, snarky, sort of sarcastic things. And I mean, those comments are probably not the key performance indicators of what ignorance is within the judo community per se, but they speak towards maybe something, I guess. I
don't know whether it's ignorance or more of like you do have a lot of Mr. Know-it-alls, who comment, and the people who comment usually are Mr. Know-it-alls. And I find, especially on JudoCrazy, right? I might post a technique, and and I'll say, oh, nice ashiguruma by Takato, for example. And you'll always get people going, that's not ashiguruma, that's haraigoshi. No, that's not ashiguruma, that's oguruma, or it looks more like a taiotoshi to me, and a lot of them say it with authority, with a certain definitiveness, like they know and you don't. Oh, you're wrong, that's not uchimata, that's haraigoshi. Or and on the ground, you might describe a strangle, and you say that's quite a unique strangle. You don't see it a lot. Oh, I see it all the time. I see it all the time. This is common. I mean, people will post comments like that.
Right.
Or you'll say, oh, this technique hasn't, been around for a while, and we're seeing a re-emergence of it. No, it's been around. It's very common. They'll write comments like Mr. Know-it-alls. You get a lot of that.
Wow.
Yeah. So people who are very sure of themselves that they know better than you.
Very, very interesting, my friend. Well, thank you very much for your time. I've taken about 90 minutes of your time. We've explored all of this. I did have one last question here. If it's up to you if you want to answer it or not. I believe you did answer it right from the top in a very proactive, positive, and diplomatic way. But I'll ask you if you want before we finish this. This one's called Critique on Classical Approach. The article critiques the classical approach, indicating that it might not work in modern randori. Do you believe that the classical approach still holds any merit or value in contemporary judo? Why or why not?
Okay, well, I mean, some techniques, some classical versions of techniques do work. Like, for example, do you know what's called uchigari? Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So the classical version of kouchigari works well. So it's fine. Classical version of kouchigari works well. And so I have no issues with that. So I'm not a person who would make a blanket statement that all classical techniques are useless. That's not true. There are classical versions of techniques that work perfectly. And if they do work and they are seen in competition, which means that they work. If they're seen in competition, obviously they work, right? By definition, they work. Then I'll be glad to embrace it and teach it. But the problem is that oftentimes the classical techniques don't work. But not all classical techniques don't work. Some do work. And so the ones that do work, we incorporate it and we do teach it at KL Judo. So I hope that answers your questions. That, you know, I think your question is that, does it have any relevance? The ones that work do have relevance, and some do work. Yeah.
Very interesting. I'm gonna see if I can find some clips that I want to send your way. Let
me ask you one thing. Let me
please,
ask you, like,
please.
you're a fan of judo. That's obvious,
Sure.
you know, and you've done a bit of judo, and let me ask you, if you know, as a fan of judo, wanted to learn to do a throw, any throw, whatever throw, right? And you wanted to learn to do the throw. What questions would you ask of a coach?
Wow, jeez, that's I love that question. So I've had different coaches over the years, and I've seen different coaches coach, and I've like informally spoken to different coaches. One question I would ask is, here's my body type, and this is probably related more to someone getting older like myself, right? I'm not in my 20s, I'm not in my early 30s, you know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, without getting too much in detail, I've had some injuries, right? I've been dealing with some stuff, and I'm okay, but I'm just saying I'm on my way back, slowly but surely. One question I would really ask, I'd be curious to ask in general, is, here's my body type, here's my level of mobility, here's my strength. Based on this criteria, can you isolate not 20, but 2 or 3 throws I should be focusing on in randori, in every form, because there's so many throws and there's so much to learn, even if you're a recreationalist, right? Like, so that's the sort of question I would like to ask. Not only that, but also, oh, am I cutting out? Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear you? Yeah.
Okay.
No, you're frozen. The video is frozen, but the audio is still good.
Right. No, I guess so. And another thing too is just gripping strategies at a very basic level, understanding that, because I will tell you this, I have been grabbed by judokas, especially like competitive types, and I've been grabbed. Like, it's a whole different world. It's a whole different game, you know. And I'm by no means an expert, as you know. I am a fan. Sure, I've dabbled in these sports, but quite frankly, that doesn't really mean anything, does it? But I've been grabbed by people who do this on a competitive level, and it's frightening. I don't, you know, I may outweigh them, but I will tell you this: they have full control of me. Believe it or not.
No, listen, we could do a whole podcast just on, you know, on gripping. That's a whole different topic. But let me try to answer your first question first.
Sure.
And then I'll address the gripping thing very briefly. So the first question, or the first statement you made was that that you would like to ask about, you know, you would like to ask a coach, you know, whether he or she could recommend a set of techniques for you, right? Given your situation, your age, your mobility, whatever injuries you have, and so on, right? And I think a good coach, a capable coach, should absolutely be able to do that. Should absolutely be able to take in that information that you've given, your age, have a look at your body type, understand what injuries you may have, what limitations you may have, what fitness level you're at, and be able to recommend a set of techniques. I think a capable judo coach should absolutely be able to do that. Only problem is that not all coaches are capable. But a good coach absolutely should be able to give you a definitive set of 2, 3, 4 techniques.
Right.
That, okay, try this. This would be safe for you. This would be good for you given your situation. And if a coach can't do that, then maybe they're not that good. So absolutely, a coach should be able to do that, right? And quite quickly, just using the database that's in their mind. I mean, if you were present in my club and I could actually look at your body type and have a short discussion about your medical history and what limitations you may have, off the top of my head, I would be able to give you 3 or 4 things that you could try. Yeah. So does that answer your question?
Oh, absolutely, it does. And I've seen some videos where I could tell, as you're coaching, you're in a way customizing for a particular player. And I love seeing that. Of course, it's integral to that person's. I feel when you customize, you're leaning in on what they have, what as you mentioned, what they can do, and you see potential possibly as well to see, hey, maybe they can reach higher. But I think that sort of approach is valuable.
With regards to gripping, I mean, like I said, gripping is a whole nother topic in itself, and it's a very big thing at KL Judo. As you know, and it's largely, actually, I tell you, because of my judo upbringing in the United States, gripping is a big thing among top level training centers in America, right? Jimmy Pedro teaches it, Shintaro Higashi teaches it, all those top level places in America, they really, really, really emphasize gripping. And I think the reason has to do with the fact that, if judo is quite niche in America, right? Compared to, say, Japan or Russia or France or Brazil, where there's lots of judo, right? There's not so much judo in America. And so you need to have gripping, good strategic gripping as your competitive advantage, right? Because you don't have, the kind of depth and breadth that you have in Japan, right? So you only have a center with only maybe a handful of top athletes, not a whole room full of athletes to play with. So you can't do 2 hours of randori and get all that experience and all that exposure that the Japanese have. So you have to do very strategic, systematic gripping,
right?
And be taught that. And I was taught that when I had my training in the United States, and I think it's because of that background that I had, that I also emphasize it a lot at my club. So people who come from other clubs who visit us, especially those who come from traditional clubs, where they don't do a whole lot of grip fighting, very traditional Japanese style. They just grab and they just move around, right? And they don't do. They all comment. They say, everybody in your judo club grip fights. And I said, yeah, that's the culture here, and it's very interesting because I tell you, when we have beginners join our club, we don't usually off the bat teach strategic gripping to beginners. We teach them techniques first, and if they stick around long enough and they get better, then we start to teach gripping. But usually we don't straight away, you're a white belt, we teach you strategic gripping. No, usually you just learn a few techniques first, and then if you stay around long enough and you seem to be serious about judo, then we'll start to teach you gripping. But early on you don't learn it. But if you watch our white belts, even before they are taught gripping, they grip fight. I mean, they're just mimicking what they see. If everybody in the club, all their seniors, everybody is grip fighting. When in Rome, do as Romans do, right? You go there and everybody's grip fighting, they'll just grip fight even if they don't know how. And they're just mimicking what they see or what they think is grip fighting. And I find that interesting, because there was one day I was just watching a few of our white belts, and I said, I've never taught that guy grip fighting. I've never taught that girl grip fighting, and she's out there grip fighting.
Right. That's awesome.
It's because that's the culture, right?
Right.
That's the culture of the club. By osmosis, they pick it up. And so,
Fascinating.
but let's save this for another podcast where we can just do an entire 90 minutes on gripping.
For sure, for sure. And even the topic of cultures is a recurring one in
Very
what
important,
we're,
right?
yeah. And I'm curious to explore that.
I tell you, there's probably 101 topics
Oh, for
that
sure,
we can
for
explore.
sure. For
So
sure.
this can be a series that one day we talk about club culture, another day we can talk about gripping, another day we can talk about mental training, another day we can talk about fitness and conditioning for judo, another day we can talk about fighting spirit, another day we can talk about injuries. I think there's endless topics that we can explore.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining us here. And if folks will want to read up if they want to read this blog or read more and see more cool videos that you produce, they can check it out at kljudo.com. I'm going to have all the links in the episode description. Thank you very much for your time. I know my screen is frozen, but I'm still here. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, I can do. All right, thanks very much. I have to say, excellent questions. Excellent questions. You really came up with the kind of questions that I would like to answer.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, and more importantly, excellent article. And I hope you write more. All these questions are based off your from me reading your article and trying to kind of challenge the narrative. You know what I'm saying? You're trying to ask.
That could be our modus operandi. Where
Sure.
maybe I'll write an article about gripping, and then you can read that article about gripping, and from there you can come up with questions.
That works for me, man. Yeah, love that.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Have a good day
All right.
or good evening. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye.